evening, everybody. Let me thank Harish, who's a very close friend of mine, and team Gatlab Tirunelveli for letting me present this topic. Not a very commonly discussed topic in GI circles, I guess. Hepatic hemodynamic evaluation, principles and practice. Hepatic hemodynamic evaluation assessment is HVPG, hepatic vein pressure gradient measurement. Now, in next 15 minutes or so, we will be navigating through these headings. First, we will try to present the data evolved over last decade or so, which point towards the fact that a paradigm shift has occurred in the understanding of portal hypertension. Portal hypertension used to be equated with variceal bleeding, predicting the risk of variceal bleed, prevention of variceal bleed, treatment of variceal bleed. This was all portal hypertension was all about. But now we talk in terms of time to decompensation. CTP and MEL score are imperfect tools to predict decompensation, although they are organ allocation tools. So HVPG or hepatic vein pressure gradient measurement, will it come handy when we go beyond variceal bleeding in portal hypertension? Time to decompensation and survival, does it come into the purview when it comes to understanding of portal hypertension? Now, second question is endoscopy. Is endoscopy sufficient enough to evaluate portal hypertension? I would say 90% or even 99% of GI practice is to rely on endoscopic findings and then decide on treatment of portal hypertension. But then, should we quantify portal hypertension, or is there any, the literature update on grading of portal hypertension, and if we grade that, does it have a bearing on clinical correlates, or are there any clinical translation when it comes to liver-related events? If you grade portal hypertension, will that correlate with clinical decompensation events? Now, after that, we would just quickly briefly mention the technique of HVPG measurement, demonstrate the technique, and before winding up, would list out the clinical indications. So, while making this presentation, I phoned up my colleagues, my friends, 5 of them fresh from DM, last year's DM, and 4 of them 40 years age group, more than 10 years into practice. So these are the issues we need to dissect out and discuss out really. 1, portal hypertension is diagnosed and treated primarily to prevent and treat variceal bleed. Number 2, portal hypertension is commonly and best assessed by endoscopy. Any further information on portal hypertension gathered by any other modality does not have clinical translation. Number 3, HVPG or hepatic vein pressure gradient measurement is a research tool. Number 4, some wondered, are there any clinical indication for HVPG measurement at all? As I mentioned, portal hypertension mostly, used to center around variceal bleeding. Endoscopy graded the varix and then we treat. But we also knew that there are some magic numbers when it comes to HVPG, whereby number 10, hepatic vein pressure gradient, varices start forming. Number 12, hepatic venous pressure gradient, varices might rupture. And last decade, we also understood, in fact, last 2 decades, that in variceal bleeding, if HVPG is more than 20, there is no point in endotherapy. How much of endotherapy you do, that's going to fail, and we will have to go for preemptive tipsing, tips placement. Now, let's present this case of Mr. R, who presented to me 7 months back, 45-year-old male with ulcerative colitis and primary sclerosing cholangitis, diagnosed 10 years back, but he opted not to get treated for the last 6 years. He came with fatigue and non-specific symptoms. In fact, there was no decompensation of liver disease, and his ulcerative colitis activity was assessed and medicines reinstated. Liver assessment, endoscopically, he only had 2 columns of very small varices. On deep inspiration, the varices are seen and mild portal gastropathy. His platelet count was 1.7 lakhs, and CT showed prominent volume distribution changes, prominent caudate lobe. Hepatic vein pressure gradient was done, 12 millimeters of mercury, and he was initiated on Carvedilol. 2 questions remain. This conventionally this is a compensated liver disease due to primary sclerosing cholangitis, and endoscopy just shows very small varices. Should we be really going ahead with HPPG measurement? We did that, and the value is 12 millimeters of mercury, and obviously 12 means we have to treat. That is the time when varices rupture, although there are no significant varices at this point. Now, this is not, in fact, this particular concept of small varix or small varix or no varix, but then the portal pressure is high, has been thoroughly researched, published, and there is an ongoing large-scale RCT in the UK, multicentric RCT in the United Kingdom, BOPE trial, looking at this particular concept of small varix in a compensated disease. Is there any difference when we treat it in terms of variceal bleed, as well as mortality, as well as quality of life? Now, 2025 BOPE trial would get published in the UK, but well before that, we have an Indian data to be presented here. 2020 American Journal of Gastroenterology publication from Professor Sarin's group in Delhi. I would request you to focus on those two categories, no varix, small varix. More than 20, quite a significant number had more than 20. No varix category, 5% at least. In small varix category, 10%. And more than 20 is a very significant HPPG. That is a time when florid decompensation happened. Now, 12 to 20 hepatic vein pressure gradient range is the time. 12 and beyond, you get variceal bleed, and 16, you get decompensation, and 20, florid decompensation. No varix in a compensated disease, but then 20% had this particular range of hepatic vein pressure gradient measurement. And in small varix, again, 12 to 20 HPPG, 68%. The message is very clear. Even if endoscopically there is no varix or small varix, the actual portal pressures are high. And this particular study, the cohort being 741 compensated cirrhotic patients, also showed that HPPG in more than 20, there is early first decompensation event happens, more frequent decompensation events, and high mortality. There is an interesting editorial in the same issue. Compensated liver cirrhosis with 20 millimeters of mercury, is that a point of no return? In fact, yes, we need to understand a new concept coming up, which is high-risk compensated disease. Compensated, but then it's not innocuous. Prodisky trial, prediction of decompensation in cirrhosis. It's a double-blind placebo-controlled RCT. This again, compensated disease with small varix, but then HPPG is more than 10. The lessons learned from this Prodisky trial are the same as that of Delhi study, whereby small varix with more pressure, more than 10 pressure, when treated with non-selective beta blockers, either carvedilol or propranolol, it results in decreased, longer time to decompensation, decreased number of variceal bleeds, and survival as well. So we need to understand that compensated is not an innocuous situation. Compensated disease can be risky. And the conventional thinking of a compensated cirrhosis liver, watchful expectancy should not be the policy. We should treat. That is a message which evolves out of all these data. Now, is there a one-to-one correlation? Do we have a clinico-hemodynamic correlation? What are the numbers to be remembered? All of us know that 0 to 5 millimeters of mercury HPPG, there is no portal hypertension. More than 5, there is portal hypertension, but it is CSPH. Clinically, it is not CSPH. Clinically significant portal hypertension is CSPH. More than 9, that is 10, is CSPH, because that is when the events start. Varices form at 10. 12, the varices might rupture. 16, decompensation events happen. And 20, florid decompensation. In fact, the Delhi study which I showed and Prodisky, all those point towards, all the published data from Spain, from rest of Europe, shows that 20 is a very important figure, and medical management beyond 20 millimeters of mercury is futile. And if feasible, possible, patient should go for liver transplantation. So pretty much portal hypertension grading, it predicts time to decompensation, survival, and mortality. And portal hypertension assessment goes well beyond variceal bleeding and well beyond endoscopic findings. So let me just put this nutshell points here based on various studies. And if you look at compensated disease, more than 10 millimeters of mercury HPPG, what would happen? Less than 10 millimeters of mercury, what would happen? If it is less than 10, compensated disease without varix, 90% is the 90% is the chance of that patient remaining decompensation free at 4 years. And if HPPG is more than 10 in a compensated disease without varix, at 2 years, the varix development is approximately 1/3, 28%. And again, 22% is decompensation happening at 2 years. So this underscores the importance of the disparity between endoscopic finding and actual portal pressure. And interestingly, 1 millimeter increase in HPPG translates into an increased death risk of 3%. This is a meta-analysis which again came to the same conclusions as the previous studies which I presented here, whether with decompensation, with ascites or without ascites, lowering portal pressure translates into decreasing decompensation events, delaying decompensation events and liver-related events, improves the mortality figures are better, and transplant intervention can be delayed. So when we say successful portal hypertension treatment, in fact, endoscopically we see grade 2 varix restart, NSBP. The fact is 30 to 40% is a non-response for non-selective beta blocker. So the actual strict definition of successful treatment is more than 20% reduction from baseline HPPG or bring down HPPG to an absolute value below 12. That is a successful treatment. Now, going beyond liver medicine practice, in fact, Dr. Harris had mentioned that the topic should have something for the surgeons as well. In fact, there is lots for the surgeons here. A very significant issue in liver units where patient undergo liver resection, whether the patient would decompensate or not, hepatocellular carcinoma, liver resection. Hepatic venous pressure gradient measurement is a very important tool to predict decompensation. If HPPG is more than 10 in a major resection or right lobe resection, the chance of decompensation would be more. Going a step ahead, even in non-hepatic surgeries, let's say colon cancer surgery or coronary bypass surgery, in a compensated cirrhosis liver, if HPPG is more than 16, then decompensation can happen. So, in summary, in surgical practice, whether it be liver resection or non-hepatic surgery in a compensated liver disease patient, looking at liver pressures does matter. That's a game changer. In fact, in few of the European liver-focused centers, TIPSing has become a standard of care prior to non-hepatic surgeries. In a compensated disease, if the pressure is more, then TIPS first, optimize the patient, and then go ahead with the non-hepatic surgery so that post-surgical decompensation is reduced or minimized. Let's move on to the technique. In a normal liver, the sinusoids are interconnected. So the portal venous pressure, when you wedge the hepatic vein with an inflated balloon, the portal venous pressure would get dissipated through the interconnected sinusoids. In a cirrhotic liver, these interconnections are, because of fibroprogression, these interconnections are blocked, and portal venous pressure would be pretty much similar to wedged hepatic vein pressure. A catheter goes into the hepatic vein, and then the balloon is inflated, and the static column of blood reflects portal pressure. So that's the principle of hepatic venous pressure gradient measurement. Choosing the right vein matters. The balloon should not be wedged at a bifurcation of vein. Balloon should not be wedged in a situation where the dye escapes through a collateral. So collaterals should be avoided. And going further distally deep into the liver substance also would end up sampling a lesser liver volume, lesser hemodynamic sampling of a lesser liver volume. So choosing the right vein matters, and these are the accessories for hepatic vein pressure gradient measurement. There are many catheters being used, but I would prefer Swan-Ganz, which is readily available in many critical care units as well as cath labs. Triple Leeuwen Swan-Ganz, 7 French or 5 French. Let me just quickly present these videos. Choosing the right vein is very important. There should not be any collateral. The balloon is inflated now. The balloon should not be wedging onto a bifurcation. The vein is nicely filling, that is right hepatic vein, and this is a very good vein selection. And once this is done, let the dye flow off and then start measuring the pressure. Now, in transplant setting, there are certain cardiopulmonary complications, which we are worried about and even scared about. Portopulmonary hypertension at its highest grade is an absolute no-no for transplant. And we look at echocardiogram, right ventricular systolic pressure, RVSP, and if it's more than 40, then we have to do the right heart cath. So this, in fact, comes as a kind of a package deal whereby you can sneak in the catheter after measuring HPPG, come out of the liver, go into right heart, go into the pulmonic artery, and even you can wedge in the lung. So pulmonary capillary wedge pressure as well can be measured. I do apologize. This is not a fax captured video. This was in fact a mobile capture. Sorry for that. Well, the formula, after choosing the right vein, we measure 3 wedge pressures and 3 free pressures in the hepatic vein. Subtract free pressure from the wedge hepatic vein pressure after averaging out 3 recordings. That is a formula. Now, 2 approaches regarding adverse events, femoral and jugular. Femoral, almost there are no significant complications, although thrombosis mentioned that. Yet to see, even it's extremely rare. Infection, of course, we give an antibiotic shot prior to the measurement. And jugular approach should be opted only if we need a tissue sampling. TJLB, transjugular liver biopsy, if it is indicated, then we can offer jugular method. It has got its own complications. And radiation safety perspective, diagnostic hepatic hemodynamic study, which is HPPG measurement, doesn't have a very high level of radiation. I was fortunate to be part of the study done in Switzerland, 5.4 millisieverts. This is almost similar to an ERCP. So essentially safe procedure if done in the femoral approach. That's the message. Now let's come to the clinical indications. We should be talking about evidence-based medicine, EBM. As we all know, there are different types of medicine: imagination-based medicine, impression-based medicine. In the US and in India, in Asia, we practice business-based medicine, arrogance-based and ego-based. There are so many types of medicines, and I should not be, leading you all into a rabbit hole and then into Alice of Wonderland, blowing up a small thing into a big entity. So I would rather prefer the indications to be categorized into 3: standard of care, which is evidence-based medicine; potential indications, which again are kind of evidence-based medicine; and there are many projected research questions as well, projected indications, where data is not robust. Now, standard of care, I would put the compensated disease with small varix or no varix category. I'm sure all of us encounter this particular situation very often in our practice. The concept of high-risk compensated disease is to be recognized now. So seeing no varix, stopping it at that point may not be fair. The next indication practically would be prior to liver resection, HPPG more than 10, there is more chance of decompensation. Now, variceal bleed, many advanced liver centers are going for preemptive tipsing, whereby if HPPG is more than 20, then don't go for endotherapy, go for a within 72 hours tipsing. That is preemptive tipsing or pre-tipsing. And if you remember, 20 years back or so, there was only one clinical indication for HPPG, which was to distinguish between cirrhotic portal hypertension, which is sinusoidal portal hypertension, from pre-sinusoidal portal hypertension. The commonest one used to be NCPF. We don't see any of NCPFs nowadays. But that was the only indication 20 years back. We have expansion. And regarding potential indication, as was shown, prior to extrahepatic surgery, looking at pressures and tipsing is a upcoming indication. Then prognosticating cirrhosis with portal hypertension. We do have imperfect tools like MEL score and CTPC, and neither of these, in fact, precisely predict when am I going to. Patients keep asking, when am I going to decompensate? Up to how many years can I go in this decompensation phase until I need a transplant? So answer to that, unfortunately, cannot be had from MEL scoring or CTPC or even endoscopic findings. And alcoholic hepatitis, as I mentioned, 22, there is one study, HPPG of 22 will not respond to medical management. So it's not just Matrix index, HPPG more than 22 also, the alcoholic hepatitis cases should go to the transplant surgeon. And there are many other indications, in fact projected, which if anybody is interested, surgeons especially, maybe we can discuss. And let me conclude. So quantifying portal hypertension matters. While evaluating and treating portal hypertension, we need to think beyond variceal bleeding. And HPPG as a clinical tool defines portal hypertension. More than 5 is portal hypertension. Defines clinically significant portal hypertension. More than 9 is CSPH. and prognosticates the entire spectral progression of cirrhosis. 10, you start getting varix, 12, varix microrupture, 16, decompensation, and 20 is a florid decompensation where kind of it's a point of no return, and that is a time, if feasible and possible, transplant should be done. So indeed, it's a portal sphygmomanometer. The ability of HPPG to predict overall liver-related events, mortality, and well beyond variceal hemorrhage is emerging. The concept of high-risk compensated disease. A compensated disease, no varix, small varix, but then HPPG is more than 20 is a high-risk compensated disease. This concept has to be recognized now. Thank you all for patiently listening. I have just put it up as a portal sphygmomanometer showing the various numbers signifying spectral progression. Thanks again. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Harry. It was a very excellent presentation about the clinical application of HPPG and showing how it is important in assessing portal hypertension. Absence of varices doesn't prove that there is no portal hypertension. Also, it's rests on its role in risk of GI bleed as well as surgical evaluation of extrahepatic surgery and resection. So there are a lot of points to be discussed. When we think of controlling portal hypertension, that pharmacological measures is the only thing we have in our hand. But using tips early to control portal hypertension, there are some points, some arguments against it, that when you do tips, you are increasing the portal systemic shunt. You are controlling by creating an artificial portal systemic shunt, and you are reducing the sinusoidal portal blood flow. So that will worsen the hepatic damage over the long time by reducing liver regeneration, nutrition. The portal blood flow is not reaching the sinusoids. So early tips, as you said, in Europe, they practice before to reduce portal hypertension. So even though tips reduces portal hypertension, in the long term, is it beneficial? It may reduce portal hypertension complications, but it may worsen the liver failure over a long time.
Yeah. So can I address that last point which you raised? Regarding, tipsing causing a decompensation, in well-selected cases, the chance of this occurring is not that high. Biochemically, we do look at am I audible and visible?
Yes.
Yeah, so we do look at the biochemical parameters. In fact, the MEL score of 18 is used to be kept as a cutoff for tipsing. In fact, we have relaxed that now, especially for variceal bleeding with HPPG more than 20. We don't even look at the biochemical numbers. So yesteryears, conventionally, bilirubin not more than 5, INR not more than 2.5, MEL not more than 18. All those biochemical parameters were strictly kept as a cutoff to prevent a stealing effect and decompensation following tip shunting. So early tipsing in well-selected cases, in cases which are not biochemically deranged, in cases where the biochemistries are not grossly deranged, then the chance of decompensation is much less. And regarding the European practice, especially this is so in oncology practice, because see, a colon cancer is getting operated, and after colon cancer, if chemo is indicated, that again adds on to the burden. Post-operative decompensation along with the liver has to bear with chemo as well. So optimization in whichever way possible should be done prior to that. That's the funda behind tipsing for non-hepatic surgeries.
Hello.
Yeah, Dr. Neeraj.
So good evening, teachers, seniors, colleagues, and juniors. Thank you for the lucid presentation, sir. I have a query. As you said, there is a concept of high-risk compensated disease. So does that mean every compensated cirrhotic should be subjected to HPPG? So is that what you meant?
Well, I was just presenting the data. So when we say every compensated disease at the time of presentation should undergo HVPG, availability heuristics matter. How often can we get HVPG measurement in how many hospitals in Kerala? I was fortunate to have spent 2 weeks in ILBS Delhi. Every cirrhotic patient, at the time of diagnosis, obviously undergoes an HVPG, and on decompensation events, they undergo HVPG. I think that is how they, in fact, churned out that 741 compensated disease patients. Maybe that was part of a protocol, but there are many other, even AIG also does more frequent HVPG. So availability aspect, leaving that apart, I would say, if possible, in a compensated disease, HVPG can be done. My patient, whom I present, that ulcerative colitis and primary sclerosing cholangitis, he is compensated without any significant varix, but he's 12. HVPG is 12, and he deserves treatment. And based on the data which we presented, the Brediski trial as well as the ongoing interim results of BOP trial, and the Delhi results, all those point towards the fact that if pressure is high, you treat and reduce the portal pressure, chance of decompensation is less, survival is better, transplant is delayed. So looking at all those long-term benefits, if available, HVPG should be attempted.
Thank you.
Hari, can I ask something?
Yes, please, sir.
Yeah, in that case, I found that platelet count is more than 1.5.
So, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so according to Bavino, he should not be having any significant varices at all. So, no, that is different. So, as a corollary to Nihar's question, is there a subset of patients with compensated portal hypertension we would like to do an HPPG as a priority based on liver stiffness or spleen stiffness or any other non-invasive methods of assessing portal hypertension?
Thank you, sir. That's a very important question. So Bavino 6 1.5 equates to varix formation. That is what Krishna sir was trying to highlight. But unfortunately, nothing correlates. Platelet count of 1.5 lakh, endoscopic varices, and HPPG measurement, there is no real correlation. And regarding spleen stiffness, and I know that data has come up from Trivandrum Medical College regarding splenic stiffness as well as liver stiffness, but all these are evolving, and nothing really at this point, no other modality equates with HPPG in terms of actually measuring portal pressure. So I'm not sure whether at this point we have a surrogate of HPPG, either splenic stiffness or liver stiffness.
Yeah, another aspect related to Krishna's question. So other than HPPG, is the Doppler study of portal flow rate, does it have any indication to the portal pressure? If it is a retrograde flow, hepatofugal flow, so it also indicates the severity of portal hypertension. There's another. The Trivandrum Medical College has a Doppler machine in the department, so the people are well versed with it. So we can use that, and that is used extensively in that unit. I think.
That's right. In fact, this is a European trend whereby sonohepatology, sonography is increasingly being used in hepatology practice. The machine there in Trivandrum Medical College is supersonic imaging, I guess. That has got various parameters even to look at, in addition to fibroscan, elastogram, inflammation can be quantified with a viscosity coefficient, then controlled attenuation parameter for fat, and Doppler, of course, to look at the portal hemodynamics. But again, this doesn't equate with the actual measurement. So all these are, platelet count of 1.5, endoscopic varices, stiffness measurements of spleen as well as liver. Nothing really equates with the actual pressure. So all those may be done, but then nothing is absolute.
Yeah, our supersonic machine does not have the viscoelasticity properties. That is the newer upgraded version.
Right. Okay.
Sir, can I ask something?
Yes, please. Yeah, Dr.
Arun, surgeon here.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Surgeons are always after HPPG, especially for liver resections as well as non-liver GI surgeries. Definitely, it's an excellent tool. Whenever it's available, it's very useful. Just one or two things, like what are the situations where we may get a false values like Budd-Chiari, hepatic vein thrombosis, portal vein thrombosis? What are the chances and how we should tackle in such situations?
Right. So, I mean, that again, very important question. Thank you, Dr. Arun, for bringing that. Hepatic vein pressure gradient measurement actually evaluates sinusoidal portal hypertension only. But if a cirrhotic patient has a pre-sinusoidal component in the form of extrahepatic portal venous obstruction, that will not get reflected in the HVPG measurement. So that we will have to consider as an additional component of portal hypertension, but will not get reflected in HVPG. That's a fallacy. And in a thrombosis which is occurring in the hepatic venous side, unless and until this is a chronic, this is a long-term thrombosis with fibronodularity and the cirrhotic transformation occurring, HVPG is not the right tool for that either. So to summarize, only for sinusoidal portal hypertension, which is cirrhosis liver, HVPG is useful. Any other add-on portal hypertension components like a portal venous thrombosis or a hepatic venous thrombosis, HVPG is not the right tool.
Hari, can I ask a question? Hari?
Yes, please. Yeah, Dr. Srijaya, good evening. Yeah.
Wonderful presentation, really enjoyed.
Thank you.
Regarding availability, it is available in medical college as well as in Sri Chitra. We are free to do it. And I have a question for you. In a non-transplant center like ours, we hardly get to refer patients for transplantation. Most of our patients are like, they are always on the waiting list. Really. In a non-transplant center, how far should we go regarding HVPG in the management of patient?
Well, that's a question where I would say in a non-transplant center, this has more importance. In terms, if you look at the data which we presented, the Predisky trial, the Delhi Professor Sarin's data, all those point towards the fact that if you reduce the portal pressure, that the chance of decompensation is less. You can delay the liver-related events. You can delay liver transplantation. So if transplant is not available, then it's better to tighten up the portal sphygmomanometer. If the availability issue is not really there, then more frequent measurements may be done. And given the fact that, after initiating on NSBP, either propranolol or carvedilol, the failure, non-response, intolerance should be somewhere around 10%, but non-response is of the tune of 30 or even 40%. So you can look at that. So in a non-transplant center, I would say HVPG has more application than in a transplant center.
So it suggests that we do HVPG in all compensated cirrhosis. And if the portal pressure is more than 10, go in for pre-primary prophylaxis, as Dr. Sarin said, or should we do it in all patients with portal hypertension, whether it is significant or non-significant?
Any diagnosis of cirrhosis is made, ideally, a compensated cirrhosis, it's better to go for HVPG if it's available. Because we are talking about improving survival, delaying liver-related events. By controlling etiology, of course, the dynamic component of portal hypertension, which should pretty much be 30% of portal hypertension, might get controlled. But further reduction in portal pressures should, in due course, ultimately result in a long-term survival. And delaying of transplant can happen.
So should we have a repeat HVPG? And if so, after what period and what dose of beta blockers or whatever drug is used to reduce portal hypertension?
Yes, sir. So conventionally what we do is we start at a low dose, say 20 milligram of Indoral, propranolol twice daily. And then based on the hemodynamic assessment during each clinic visit, we try to escalate. But Indian patients never reach the Western dose. Western dose is in fact very high. We never reach there. But how sure are we? Non-response to beta and non-selective beta blockers, at least 30%. So how sure are we that the portal pressures have actually come down? So after initiating NSBB, after achieving a tolerable dose of NSBB, if it is available, we should be doing HVPG.
After what period of time?
Maybe 6 weeks. There is no literature to quote for, exactly at what point you redo. Based on the tolerance, based on, mean arterial pressure, based on the hemodynamic assessment of patient on each clinic visit, we do escalate. And approximately by 6 weeks, we should be able to reach the maximum tolerable dose. This is what I feel.
Dr. Hari, one question. Dr. Thomas Titus here. One or two questions I just want to ask. Do you measure the phasic pressure or the mean pressure, the hepatic wedge? That is number one. The second thing is how it could be modified by diuretics. Should you avoid diuretics because they have ascites or whatever it is? So I'm sure it will be altered by the use of diuretics. So I think a magic figure like this, I think, needs to be readdressed. And the other thing is, third question is, which is better, carvedilol or propranolol?
Yeah, thank you. Three parts for the question. The first is phasic pressure. We take the mean. In fact, the quartz crystal pressure transducer equipment calibrated for venous measurement would give a mean pressure. That is what we take for the wedge.
Because you showed a phasic pressure actually, a positive pressure. I think that's what you showed, I think, in one of the tracings. A positive
the reading that comes on the monitor. What I showed was a fluoroscopic image.
Oh.
The quartz crystal pressure transducer, which is specifically, most of the private hospitals would only be working at the arterial side. So the quartz crystal transducer has to be calibrated for venous measurements, and the mean value would be displayed on the monitor, not on the fluoroscopic. Did I show the?
I think you showed a tracing.
Okay, maybe. So ultimately,
Okay.
it stabilizes and then it gives the mean value.
Okay.
Right. The second part of the question was regarding ascites and intra-abdominal pressure. That is precisely why we, instead of relying only on a wedge pressure, which is actually a surrogate of portal venous pressure, we minus free hepatic venous pressure. Free hepatic venous pressure would, take care of the intra-abdominal, pressure due to ascites. So the very principle behind minusing FH, free hepatic venous pressure, from wedge hepatic venous pressure is to cancel out all other
Variables.
Exactly. And in fact, if you look at it, liver is the only organ which has a differential effect when it comes to Carvalho's rule. Inspiration and expiration, half of the part of the liver, the hepatic venous side of the liver, is actually reflecting intrathoracic pressure, while the portal venous side is reflecting intra-abdominal pressure. So there are many variables which keeps changing. So if you minus, instead of just choosing wedge pressure, if you minus free hepatic venous pressure from wedge hepatic venous pressure, then all these would get cancelled out. Third, I forgot.
Carvedilol versus propranolol.
Carvedilol versus propranolol. Any day, carvedilol is better in terms of inducing a better suppression of portal pressure, but there are some ifs and buts there. In a floridly decompensated patient with refractory ascites and the hepatorenal physiology in the background, then carvedilol won't be the right choice. There is an alpha additional action there that would enhance renal injury. So such situations, Inderal. But then for a compensated disease, preserved kidneys, carvedilol should be the choice. 3.125 twice daily to begin with, and then escalated.
Hari, this is Ramesh here.
Hi, sir.
Hello. Long time.
Yeah.
So, let me ask you a few questions. Is it necessary to always have the patient should have an echo as well prior to doing an HVPG to rule out erroneous readings? Number one. Number two, you were saying about, as we know about before liver surgery, pressure more than 10 needs a TIPS ideally, and non-hepatic 16. That is what is said. But this 16, even for other HPB surgeries other than liver, is a pressure above 10 safe, like pancreatic surgery? So when you say liver, don't you mean pancreatic also, or is it just purely liver?
Yeah.
Does it mean all HPB work?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Two components again. Yeah, echo evaluation, which means an abdominal Doppler. That is what you meant, I guess. Abdominal Doppler evaluation is
No, I mean the cardiac echo.
So we are talking about portopulmonary hypertension and cirrhotic cardiomyopathy.
Okay.
Is that right? So Doppler evaluation is just a screening test for these two cirrhosis-induced cardiopulmonary complications. In portopulmonary hypertension, the echo parameter is right ventricular systolic pressure.
No.
But then again,
What I mean is will you get an erroneous pressure? Is there a chance of getting an erroneous resting pressure if you don't have a baseline echo? Is there a chance?
No, not really, in fact. Echocardiogram need not be done always prior to the hepatic hemodynamic assessment.
There's no chance of getting a wrong resting.
Not really. In fact, that particular values of echo, especially RVSP more than 40, is just kept as a screening. Every patient, it is not financially viable to channelize every patient into right heart cath patient. So, echocardiogram is kept as a screening tool. If more than 40, go for measurement, actual measurement, cath measurement. But this need not be done always. If you are aiming at a HPPG measurement, getting a right heart cath measurement is not that difficult. So getting a screening echocardiogram prior to every HPPG hepatic hemodynamic assessment is not needed. This is what I personally feel. And second question is regarding pancreaticobiliary. Any surgeries outside liver, the concern regarding a right lobe resection, a major resection, is that you are losing a big chunk of parenchyma along with the tumor being resected out. That is why the HPPG cutoff is a bit low, 10. While in any surgeries done outside the liver, which includes pancreatic surgery, and a colonic surgery versus pancreatic surgery versus a coronary artery bypass surgery, all these, I would say, should be similar in terms of keeping a cutoff of 16.
Okay.
Is that sensible?
Yeah, because you're removing a part of the liver and the
yes. You only have the residual functional FLR is low after liver resection, while that doesn't apply to other surgeries, including pancreatic surgeries. The liver is full after extrahepatic surgery.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Venu here. Can I ask a silly question? How does reducing the portal pressure delays the decompensating events?
Okay. So Venu sir's question is, see, portal hypertension, if it is brought down, how can it delay decompensation events?
How does it delays the decompensating events? That's the studies shows.
Yeah, this is what the studies showed.
Yeah, what is the mechanism? Because on the other side, as Dr. Jacob Phillips said, you are reducing the blood flow to the bypassing the blood flow to the liver. Hepatotrophic factors are taken away.
Yeah,
so it is damaging to the liver.
Understood. So it is essentially the decompensation events happen because of compensatory mechanisms, humoral compensatory mechanisms. So portal hypertension beyond a particular level would initiate and instigate, activate vasodilatory molecules to begin with. 5 of them, both endothelial as well as non-endothelial is endo, non-endothelial is glucagon, and these would cause systemic vasodilatation. The mean arterial pressure comes down, and kidneys are less fed. Renin-angiotensin-aldosterone axis takes over. So this is basically a biochemical cascade, a humoral mechanism, which would ultimately result in ascites formation. RA axis and then ascites formation. Sodium dips down. So by reducing portal pressure, you are not allowing the portal hypertension to spill over into the humoral side. Humoral compensatory mechanism won't be activated.
And maybe by preventing hemorrhagic events also?
Certainly, yes, because we already know that variceal bleeding occur due to portal hypertension, and varix formation has a particular cutoff, varix rupture has a particular cutoff. HPPG of more than 20 is a very high, portal pressure, and if it's a variceal bleed endotherapy, it doesn't work at 20. So all these gradations we know in variceal bleeding. So reducing portal hypertension obviously is going to benefit in, variceal bleeding part as well.
So one explanation for that, maybe reducing portal hypertension will reduce the shunting of portal blood away from the sinusoids, because portal hypertension induces shunt formation. So once more shunts by tips you meant? No, by other methods. By tips, I don't think. By if you reduce portal hypertension by pharmacological methods, the shunting is reduced and the blood flow to the liver is normalized. So hepatotoxic factors, regeneration increase. Other methods other than tips will improve liver survival, the delay liver decompensation. Yeah, I saw a question from Naren sir about HPPG in veno-occlusive disease in the chat box. Veno-occlusive disease, is HPPG useful or can be done?
Right. So this was actually, thank you Naren sir for that question. This was previously addressed when Dr. Arun pointed out regarding how do we, what kind of importance can we give for HPPG in Budd-Chiari syndrome as well as portal venous thrombosis. So only sinusoidal portal hypertension is addressed in HPPG. So veno-occlusive disease to begin with is a post-sinusoidal portal hypertension to begin with. So HPPG may not be the right tool.
Hari, it was a very exciting talk and short and sweet, and lot of awareness raised and points, controversial though, but gives a new insight into the management of liver disease, where we cannot maybe sit on a compensated liver disease for quite some time, like we often practice in our clinical. And I think there are some regarding, is there a role for HPPG in ectopic varices? Is there a different cutoff, or is the management in this ectopic varices which are difficult to manage? Or and also I'd like to just see the chat box. Actually, we cannot see the chat box from here.
Okay.
There are some questions there. I'd like to address that also.
Right. So regarding ectopic, like in fundal varix, ectopic should be similar to fundal varix, I guess. Fundal varix doesn't bleed primarily based on portal pressure. Fundal variceal bleeding is not HPP, not purely pressure related. So applying the same principle, I guess, though I'm not sure, ectopic varices also may not have a one-to-one correlation to HPPG. May I go to the chat box? Dr. Prajobs, would you see HPPG for pre-primary prophylaxis in portal hypertension as in Yeah, I think the data which we presented already, compensated disease, HPPG getting done, and then treatment. Dr. Nihar, which is better, propranolol or carvedilol? This also we have taken up in one of the questions. Carvedilol certainly is more potent than propranolol, but there are certain situations where carvedilol cannot be prescribed, especially renal compromise and refractory ascites. Such situations, propranolol is the option. Is HPPG measurement dynamic like MELD or CTP score? Much more, because see, MELD, although it's a numerical number, the way it is derived, and CTP having laboratory figures as well as clinical findings, both these doesn't have a one side that doesn't have a wide range, and the numerical conversion also doesn't actually reflect the pathological process. While HPPG, although it's a pressure measurement, it's actually a hemodynamic sampling of a larger volume of liver. What happens at histopathological level is being translated into a number. The fibronodularity, microthrombi in portal vein and hepatic vein, plus the dynamic component of inflammation, all those are being translated into a single hemodynamic number. So HPPG certainly is much more reflective of the pathological process with a wider range. Dr. Nihar's portal vein thrombosis suggests that HPPG will be more than 20. Okay, this again, so the question here is, in a case of portal vein thrombosis, does it suggest, does this point towards the fact that HPPG is more than 20? Actually, no. Portal venous thrombosis and HPPG 20 has no bearing. Because portal venous thrombosis is a pre-sinusoidal portal hypertension, and that will not get reflected in HPPG measurement at all. So PVT and HPPG 20, I don't think are correlated. Narendra sir, is this useful in veno? Yeah, that we already took up. The role of US in measuring PHT, results are comparable. Very primordial data. Endoscopic ultrasound, has found some applications in portal hypertension, but there is no data to say that the EUS measured HPPG. There is a method of measuring HPPG through EUS that equates to the actual catheter measurement. Harish, I think we have covered most of the questions.
Okay. Any further comments from online? Those online or any? Okay, I think we had a very interesting, I must say, very interesting and thought-provoking session. Thank you, Dr. Hari, as expected from you. It was very interesting, and we all really enjoyed. After a long break, we have a few of us assembled here offline. And thank you very much for giving this talk to Trivandrum Get Club. It was attended, I think, from across Kerala, from many. You can hear the applause from the crowd here. It's not artificial; it is it is natural. Yeah, real applause. Unlike our online simulations. Okay. So I once again thank the moderators Neeraj and Jacob Phillips sir also for moderating session, and all those who have attended online, and also all those who have taken the pains to come out and support us in our once again offline meeting, starting offline meetings. And thank you all. Thank you also of the pharma company Sun Pharma who have made this possible. And thank you very much. Okay, thank you everyone, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, thank you.